The soft hum of the airplane engines was the only comfort inside the narrow cabin. Officer Sterling Maddox, a seasoned man with a stern face and steady hands, gripped the leash of Titus, his vigilant German shepherd, as he moved down the aisle. Passengers exchanged nervous glances, sensing something was very wrong. Behind Maddox, for young adults, Delaney Crowe, Maris Langford, Cassian Ward, and Tamsin Greer sat frozen, their faces pale, hearts pounding. The recycled air was heavy with tension, and even the faint scent of fear seemed to cling to the seats. Earlier, the flight had been utterly routine. Safety demonstrations, clinking drink carts, and quiet chatter filled the atmosphere. But that illusion shattered when Titus suddenly rose from his relaxed position, his nose twitching frantically. Without warning, he pulled hard toward the rear of the plane, straight to the cramped bathroom. Sterling's gut twisted. Titus was never wrong. His reactions were trained, precise, reserved only for the gravest threats. All around, passengers shifted uneasily. Delaney tightened her grip on Maris's hand, whispering something no one else could hear. Titus scratched at the lavatory door, emitting a low growl that sent a ripple of fear through the cabin. A baby's cry broke the heavy silence. Cassian instinctively moved closer to Tamsin, shielding her, though he too was trembling. Sterling positioned himself before the door, his fingers brushing the butt of his holstered weapon, his mind racing through every worst-case scenario. Then came the bark, sharp, urgent, slicing through the air like a warning shot. Sterling steadied his breath. He had faced armed suspects and violent confrontations before, but something about this unseen threat chilled him deeper than any weapon ever had. The door in front of him seemed ordinary, but behind it lurked a darkness they couldn't yet see. Tamsin squeezed her eyes shut, silently praying as the aircraft seemed to shrink around them. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker, tight and serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay calm and remain seated. We are initiating an emergency landing." Gasps erupted. Fear gripped the passengers like a sudden storm. Sterling braced himself as the plane dipped, engines groaning under the forced descent. His pulse hammered in his ears. Whatever Titus had found, it wasn't just a suspicion. It was a ticking clock. With his hand trembling slightly, Sterling pushed open the lavatory door. Titus lunged forward with an explosive growl, his muscles rippling with urgency. The passengers watched, paralyzed by terror. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared them for what was hidden inside that tiny, shadowed space. Inside the cramped bathroom, the scene was chaos in miniature. Titus barked and clawed at a small overhead compartment, his instincts sharper than ever. Sterling Maddox stepped cautiously inside, the claustrophobic walls pressing against him. The metallic scent of something chemical filled his nose, harsh and wrong. Above him, wedged tightly into the compartment, was a battered black duffel bag, vibrating slightly as the plane shook through turbulence. Sterling's heart dropped into his stomach. No passenger would ever stow something like that in such a place. He pulled out his radio with a trembling hand. "Cabin crew, lockdown procedures now," he barked. The flight attendants sprang into action, sealing off the rear of the plane, moving passengers forward. Delaney, Maris, Cassian, and Tamsin were ushered toward the front rows, their eyes locked on Sterling's every move. Delaney's mind raced with horrible possibilities. An explosive, a weapon, something even worse? She clutched her pendant, whispering silent prayers. Titus snarled again as Sterling approached the bag. Carefully, he reached up, unzipping it by mere inches. A cold sweat broke over his brow. Inside, partially concealed under layers of clothing, were tightly wrapped bricks. Packages sealed in plastic, wires peeking from their edges. His blood turned to ice. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't money. It was something much deadlier. A soft, blinking red light from within confirmed his worst fears. Sterling jerked back, slamming the bathroom door shut and locking it from the outside. He turned to the lead flight attendant, a woman who looked seconds away from fainting. "Tell the captain," Sterling ordered, his voice low and urgent. "We have an active device on board." She nodded, pale as paper, and rushed to the cockpit. Around him, the passengers were starting to murmur, sensing the danger despite the crew's forced smiles and calming gestures. Cassian grabbed Maris's hand tightly, feeling her tremble. "Do you think it's a bomb?" he whispered, the word almost too heavy to speak aloud. Maris didn't answer. She couldn't. Every instinct inside her screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. Tamsin squeezed Delaney's arm, her fingernails digging deep into the fabric of her sleeve. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she forced herself to stay silent, breathing in shallow, terrified gasps. Sterling knelt beside Titus, placing a steadying hand on the dog's sturdy back. "Good boy," he murmured, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. The plane continued its steep descent, every shudder a reminder that time was running out. Beneath the roaring engines and panicked breaths, there was one certainty. This flight would not end the way any of them had planned. The cabin shuddered violently as the plane plummeted lower through dense, gray clouds. Passengers clung to their seats, white-knuckled and wide-eyed, the air thick with rising panic. Sterling Maddox stayed crouched near the lavatory door, his eyes flicking between Titus and the aisle ahead. He needed to act fast, but every instinct told him any sudden move could trigger disaster. Titus growled lowly, ears pinned back, as if sensing the danger pressing in from all sides. Up front, the captain's voice cracked through the intercom again. "Prepare for emergency landing. Assume crash positions." The words detonated through the cabin like a grenade. Screams erupted. Maris clutched Cassian, burying her face in his chest. Delaney reached for Tamsin, pulling her close as the two girls trembled together. Overhead bins flew open, bags and belongings raining down. Oxygen masks dangled uselessly, swinging wildly as the plane jolted again. Sterling made a split-second decision. He couldn't risk leaving the device unmonitored. Motioning for a flight attendant, he spoke quickly and clearly. "Move everyone forward. Secure the bulkhead. I'm staying back with Titus." The young attendant nodded, swallowing her fear, and began ushering passengers toward the cockpit. Titus stayed pressed to Sterling's side, vibrating with tension, his dark eyes locked on the closed lavatory door behind them. In the front rows, the passengers huddled together, whispering frantic prayers and clutching strangers' hands. Delaney glanced over at the elderly woman next to her, who was silently crying into a crumpled tissue. For one surreal moment, Delaney imagined all the lives tied to this flight: parents, children, lovers, and how easily all of it could vanish in an instant. The thought was too much. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting tears of her own. The plane dipped lower, the ground now visible through slanted windows. An endless stretch of barren fields, roads crisscrossing like thin veins. Tamsin spotted flashing lights far below. Police cruisers, fire trucks, ambulances gathering like tiny ants. Somehow, seeing the emergency crews made it all more real. They were landing not to complete their journey, but to survive. Sterling placed a hand on Titus's head, grounding both himself and the dog. "Whatever happens," he whispered under his breath, "we stay calm." Titus whined softly, almost like he understood. The plane groaned one last time as the wheels touched the runway with a bone-jarring screech. Smoke and the acrid smell of burning rubber filled the air. But before Sterling could even think about relief, a sickening realization hit him. They were still trapped with a live bomb, and time was running out faster than anyone knew. The emergency vehicles swarmed the runway, surrounding the plane like a trap closing in. Through the small windows, flashing red and blue lights painted frantic patterns across the cabin walls. Inside, the tension reached a fever pitch. Sterling Maddox stood ready, Titus at his side, both poised for whatever was about to come next. Over the intercom, a calm but strained voice instructed, "Remain seated. Authorities will assist in evacuation." Sterling's radio crackled to life. "Officer Maddox, this is ground command. Status of the threat." He pressed the talk button. "Confirmed. Device found. Active. Still contained in rear lavatory. Require bomb squad immediately." His voice was steady, but his palms were sweating beneath his gloves. Every second ticked like a hammer against his skull. Titus let out a low whine, restless and alert, as if he could feel the invisible countdown racing toward zero. In the front rows, Delaney Crowe's mind spiraled. She gripped Tamsin Greer's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Across the aisle, Maris Langford and Cassian Ward exchanged a fearful glance. None of them dared to speak. They could hear the distant barking of orders outside, the frantic coordination of first responders, but inside the aircraft, there was only the heavy sound of breathing and the unshakable knowledge that any wrong move could mean the end. 2 officers in heavy bomb suits boarded the plane with agonizing slowness. Every metallic clink of their gear sent fresh waves of terror through the passengers. They moved past Sterling with a nod, their faces obscured behind thick visors, their movements precise and deliberate. Titus growled softly but obeyed Sterling's firm hand signal to stay down. The plane, though technically grounded, still felt like it was suspended in a deadly limbo. Sterling watched the bomb squad approach the lavatory, tools in hand. He wanted to help, to act, to do something other than stand there helplessly. But protocol was clear, he had to trust them. He knelt beside Titus again, his free hand clutching the dog's collar like a lifeline. "You did good, boy," he whispered, voice breaking slightly. "You might have just saved all of us." Titus pressed against him, solid and warm in the cold, sterile air. Then, a sharp metallic snap echoed through the cabin, a sound that wasn't supposed to happen. One of the bomb technicians froze, his gloved hand hovering midair. A horrible, paralyzing realization swept over Sterling. Something had triggered. The technician turned his helmeted head towards Sterling, and through the thick glass, Sterling could see the stark terror in the man's eyes. The device had been tampered with, and it had just armed itself. The realization hit Sterling Maddox like a bullet. The bomb had been rigged to arm itself the moment anyone tampered with it. A cold sweat broke over his body as the technician gave a sharp, urgent hand signal. "Evacuate. Now." Sterling's heart pounded against his ribs. He turned to the passengers, shouting with a voice that barely sounded like his own. "Move! Everyone out! Now!" Panic exploded through the cabin. Passengers tripped over one another, scrambling toward the emergency exits as flight attendants fought to keep some sense of order. The smell of burning rubber from the landing still lingered in the air, mixing now with the sharp, electric scent of pure fear. Delaney Crowe pulled Tamsin Greer down the aisle, weaving between falling bags and abandoned belongings. Maris Langford grabbed Cassian Ward's sleeve, dragging him after her as the alarm sirens outside began to wail. Sterling stayed behind, herding people forward, his body positioned between them and the device. Titus barked frantically, clearly sensing the urgency. "Stay with me, boy," Sterling muttered, though every part of him wanted to run too. The bomb technicians were shouting into their radios, their heavily suited bodies moving clumsily in the narrow space. Through it all, Sterling kept scanning the lavatory door, half expecting the whole plane to rupture around him at any second. Outside, the emergency slides deployed with sharp hisses. People threw themselves onto them, sliding down to the tarmac where firefighters and paramedics waited with open arms. Delaney hit the slide hard, Tamsin right behind her, their bodies thudding onto the asphalt below. Maris and Cassian tumbled out next, gasping for air, their eyes darting back toward the airplane as if expecting it to erupt in flames at any moment. Sterling was among the last to leave, Titus leaping faithfully beside him as they hit the slide together. He landed roughly, pain shooting up his spine, but he barely felt it. His eyes were locked on the plane, still intact for now but dangerously unstable. Ground crews were screaming for everyone to get back, pushing the evacuated passengers farther away from the aircraft. The 2 bomb technicians still inside worked furiously, trying to disarm the device before it could detonate. Sterling watched, helpless, every muscle in his body tensed like a coiled spring. His instincts screamed at him. They didn't have enough time. In the midst of the flashing lights and chaos, a single deafening thought drowned out everything else. Something far worse than a bomb was hidden on that plane. Sterling Maddox stood among the sea of flashing lights and chaos, his gaze locked onto the airplane's trembling frame. Firefighters trained their hoses toward the fuselage as a precaution, while medics rushed to assess the terrified passengers. Titus pressed close to Sterling's leg, panting heavily, his brown eyes darting between the plane and the crowd. Sterling's heart hammered in his chest, every second stretching unbearably long as he waited for the explosion that somehow hadn't come. The bomb technicians emerged at last, their suits blackened and faces pale beneath their visors. One of them stumbled toward Sterling, ripping off his helmet with shaking hands. It's not what we thought," he gasped. Confused, Sterling grabbed him by the shoulders. "What do you mean?" he demanded. Around them, sirens wailed and officers barked orders, but Sterling only had ears for the technician's next words. "There was a device, yes, but it was a decoy," the technician said, voice raw with disbelief. "It was rigged to trigger alarms and create panic, but there was no explosive charge." Sterling reeled back, stunned. His mind raced. If the bomb was a fake, then someone had planned this entire ordeal for another reason. A distraction. His gut twisted painfully as a new, more chilling possibility crept into his mind. Across the tarmac, Delaney Crowe hugged Tamsin Greer tightly, both of them trembling. Maris Langford clutched Cassian Ward's hand, refusing to let go. The passengers huddled together, some crying openly, others staring blankly at the scene unfolding around them. None of them knew that the true danger had nothing to do with the fake bomb, or that it might already be among them, hidden in plain sight. Sterling turned sharply toward the gathered passengers, scanning the faces with a trained eye. Something gnawed at him, something he hadn't seen before in the chaos. Titus suddenly barked once, sharp and alert, his body rigid as he stared at a figure moving quickly away from the group. Sterling's heart dropped. In the confusion, someone was slipping away, someone who should have stayed put. "Titus, heel!" he barked, already sprinting after the figure with the dog bounding at his side. The figure, a man in a dark jacket and baseball cap, glanced back once, and Sterling caught a glimpse of something glinting in his hand. Not a weapon, not explosives, something far more valuable. Realization hit like a lightning strike. The fake bomb had been the perfect cover for a hijacking, and now whoever planned it was trying to disappear into the night. Sterling Maddox bolted across the tarmac, his boots pounding against the asphalt as he pursued the fleeing figure. Titus ran at his side, low and fast, a silent shadow of muscle and precision. Around them, chaos reigned. Emergency crews shouting, passengers crying, flashing lights slicing the darkness. But Sterling focused only on the man ahead, the thief whose escape had been masked by the terror of a fake bomb. His breath tore through his lungs, but adrenaline drove him harder, faster. The man ducked between emergency vehicles, weaving through the confusion like a ghost. Sterling shouted, "Stop! Police!" But the figure only ran faster. Titus barked, the sound sharp and commanding. Sterling felt the tight coil of anger in his chest. They had all been used, manipulated into panic so that this man could slip away with whatever he had stolen. And now, every second he stayed free, the danger grew. Sterling grit his teeth and pushed harder, feeling the burn in his legs. Titus surged ahead, gaining ground quickly. With a single word, "Go!" Sterling unleashed him. The dog exploded forward, a blur of tan and black fur. The man glanced back just in time to see Titus closing the distance. In a desperate move, he veered toward an abandoned maintenance shed at the edge of the runway, shoving open the door and disappearing inside. Sterling cursed under his breath but didn't hesitate. He followed, his hand hovering over his weapon as he entered the darkened building. Inside, the air was thick with dust and oil. Rows of old equipment cast long, jagged shadows across the floor. Titus growled low, sniffing the air, his body tense and ready. Sterling's eyes scanned the room rapidly, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Somewhere ahead, he heard the scuffle of boots on concrete. The man was trapped, but a cornered animal was always the most dangerous. Sterling moved slowly, carefully, signaling Titus to flank wide. Suddenly, a figure lunged from the shadows, swinging a heavy wrench. Sterling barely dodged, the metal whistling past his head. Instinct took over. He grabbed the man's arm mid-swing, twisting hard, forcing the weapon to the ground. They struggled violently, crashing against shelves and scattering tools across the floor. Titus barked furiously, circling, ready to strike. Sterling gritted his teeth, using his body weight to slam the man into the wall. "Drop it!" he roared. The thief finally surrendered, gasping for breath, and something shiny fell from his jacket pocket. An object wrapped tightly in plastic, glinting under the single flickering light. Sterling pinned the man against the wall and glanced down at the item. His stomach twisted when he realized what it was. A small black data drive. Not explosives, not weapons, something far more dangerous. Secrets. Secrets that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect, and that others might kill to retrieve. Sterling Maddox tightened the handcuffs around the thief's wrists, his muscles still trembling from the struggle. Titus sat faithfully at his side, growling low whenever the man so much as shifted. The flashing emergency lights outside the shed cast wild, spinning shadows across the grimy walls. Sterling bent down and picked up the small data drive with gloved hands, holding it up to the faint, flickering light. It looked ordinary, no bigger than a car key, but instinct screamed that what it contained was anything but ordinary. "Who are you working for?" Sterling barked, his voice sharp and cutting. The man, still panting from the chase, sneered but stayed silent. Sterling shook him roughly. "This whole bomb threat was a cover to steal this, wasn't it?" His words hung in the heavy air, unanswered. The man's dark, defiant eyes said enough. Yes, it had been a setup, and no, Sterling was not going to get anything more from him easily. Titus growled again, leaning closer, making sure the prisoner understood exactly how vulnerable he was. Sterling's mind raced. A fake bomb scare that forced a midair emergency landing, an elaborate diversion to snatch something small, almost invisible to anyone not looking. He knew instinctively, this wasn't just about money. Whatever was on this drive was important enough to risk hundreds of lives. Maybe national security, maybe corporate espionage, maybe something even bigger. He slipped the drive carefully into an evidence bag and radioed for backup, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. Outside, chaos continued. Passengers were being herded onto buses, wrapped in silver emergency blankets, their faces blank with shock. Delaney Crowe, Maris Langford, Cassian Ward, and Tamsin Greer sat huddled together, stealing anxious glances back toward the runway where the plane, and now the shed, stood under heavy guard. They had no idea that their nightmare had only scratched the surface of something much darker. Delaney pulled the blanket tighter around herself, feeling a gnawing fear she couldn't explain. Sterling emerged from the shed with the thief in tow, his jaw tight, his mind already thinking several moves ahead. The FBI would be called in. This was far beyond the jurisdiction of airport police. He knew protocol, but deep down, he also knew he couldn't just hand this over and walk away. Not when innocent lives had been put in jeopardy, and not when whoever was behind this was still out there, free and very possibly watching. As he secured the prisoner in the back of a waiting patrol car, Sterling caught a flicker of movement at the edge of the chaos, a dark figure slipping quietly into a nearby service van. His pulse jumped. Someone else was involved, and if he didn't act fast, they would vanish without a trace, taking with them answers that might save or destroy far more lives than just those on the plane. Sterling Maddox reacted instinctively. The service van jerked forward, its tires screaming as it tore away from the controlled chaos on the tarmac. Without hesitation, Sterling leapt into the nearest patrol car, yanking the door shut as Titus jumped into the passenger seat. The engine roared to life, and Sterling jammed the accelerator to the floor, chasing the retreating van. Red and blue emergency lights flashed behind him, but his focus narrowed to a single point. He couldn't let them escape. The van sped across the cracked runway, narrowly missing a line of fire trucks. Sterling kept tight on its bumper, weaving through obstacles with hair-trigger reflexes. Titus barked once, sharp and urgent, his body tense with anticipation. Sterling gritted his teeth, knowing whoever was inside that van wasn't acting alone. They were part of something bigger, something willing to orchestrate a mid-air terror just to steal a simple-looking drive. His gut twisted. Whatever secrets were on that drive were worth lives. Worth war. The van skidded onto a side road leading to the airport's maintenance perimeter, knocking down a chain-link gate like paper. Sterling pushed the patrol car harder, the engine growling under the strain. The vehicle bounced wildly over potholes and uneven asphalt, headlights slashing through the darkness. On the radio, dispatch shouted for updates, backup, orders to stand down, but Sterling ignored it all. If he lost them now, the truth would disappear forever into the night. Ahead, the van swerved violently, losing control on the rough ground. It crashed through another fence into a thick, wooded area bordering the airport. Sterling cursed and followed, the patrol car crashing through branches, mud splattering the windshield. The path narrowed, trees crowding close, scratching against the doors with sharp, metallic screeches. Titus growled low, a sound deep from his chest, as if even he understood they were running out of time. The trees opened into a moonlit clearing. The van lurched to a stop, the back door swinging open violently. A figure leapt out, sprinting toward the darkness beyond. Sterling slammed the car into park and flung himself after them, Titus right beside him. His boots pounded the wet earth, heart hammering in sync with each step. The runner was fast, desperate, weaving between the trees like a ghost. Sterling shouted for them to stop, but the figure only pushed harder, fear giving wings to their feet. Titus surged forward with a snarl, nipping at the runner's heels. The figure stumbled, crashing into the muddy ground. In a swift, practiced move, Sterling tackled them, pinning them down with an iron grip. As he yanked the figure's hood back, a cold shock shot through him. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone from the plane. Someone who had sat quietly among the terrified passengers, pretending to be one of the victims. Sterling's blood ran cold. The real enemy had been closer than he ever imagined. Sterling Maddox tightened the handcuffs around the figure's wrists, breathing heavily as he forced them up from the muddy ground. Titus circled protectively, growling low as if still sensing hidden danger. Under the pale moonlight, Sterling finally got a clear look at the traitor's face. Cassian Ward, one of the young passengers who had seemed so frightened, so ordinary. Sterling's stomach churned. All this time, Cassian had been hiding in plain sight, blending into the chaos he had helped orchestrate. "Who are you working for?" Sterling demanded, dragging Cassian toward the patrol car. Cassian's face twisted into a smirk, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. He said nothing, only chuckled under his breath. Sterling shoved him into the back seat, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. He knew better than to expect a confession now. Whoever Cassian worked for, whatever they were after, it wasn't something they wanted to explain to the police. At the scene, backup officers finally arrived, surrounding the area with weapons drawn. Delaney Crowe, Maris Langford, and Tamsin Greer stood under the glare of emergency lights, watching with wide, disbelieving eyes as Sterling returned with the captured traitor. Delaney stepped forward, confusion and fear written across her face. "Cassian?" she whispered, as if saying the name could somehow make the nightmare real. Sterling only gave a grim nod before turning away. There was no time for explanations yet. Sterling handed the small data drive to the lead FBI agent, a woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes who had just arrived on scene. She examined it briefly, her expression darkening. "You have no idea what you just stopped," she said quietly to Sterling. "This drive contains sensitive information about covert operations, political figures, national security risks. It could have dismantled entire systems if it had fallen into the wrong hands." Sterling nodded, feeling the weight of what had almost happened settle heavily on his shoulders. Cassian sat silently in the back of the patrol car, staring out the window with a blank expression. But Sterling knew better. Inside, the boy was calculating, already thinking about what he would or wouldn't say. This wasn't just petty theft or simple terrorism. This was organized espionage at the highest level. Sterling looked down at Titus, who was sitting alert by his side, the ever-loyal partner who had sensed the danger before anyone else. He bent down and scratched behind Titus's ears. "We did good, boy," he murmured. "We stopped it." As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gray and gold, Sterling stood silently at the edge of the chaos. They had survived the night, but he knew, deep in his bones, that there would always be others like Cassian, hidden among the innocent, waiting for their chance. And so, with Titus at his side, Sterling turned away from the flashing lights, ready to face whatever darkness would come next.